It's Monday, the 14th of December 2020. Welcome to the Fear and Greed Business Headlines, the business news you need in just 5 minutes. I'm Sean Aylmer. Today's headlines: China and Europe pledge greater commitments to address climate change as Australia gets left behind and business has to rethink energy policy. That's our main story. Plus, hopes of a deal between the European Union and Britain over Brexit fade, triggering panic buying. Chinese Communist Party members infiltrate embassies in Shanghai, including Australia's. And no Christmas slowdown in the housing market. China, Europe and Great Britain have promised to significantly reduce carbon emissions, upping pressure on Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison to make stronger commitments around climate change and changing the global business environment over the next decade. The virtual Climate Ambition Summit, held over the weekend, included a call from the United Nations to declare a global climate emergency and a push to follow greener policies as the world economy recovers from the coronavirus pandemic. Chinese President Xi Jinping said his country would reduce carbon dioxide emissions by 65% from 2005 levels. The European Union's 27 member states agreed to reduce carbon emissions by 55% by 2030. Around 75 world leaders took part in the virtual summit, although US President Donald Trump didn't turn up. French President Emmanuel Macron said he looked forward to welcoming back the US into the Paris Climate Agreement, which it left earlier in the year. President-elect Joe Biden said he would rejoin. While most other countries have agreed to zero net emissions by 2050, Australia hasn't, and is becoming an outlier in the fight against climate change. That's despite a CSIRO report last week saying solar and wind were the cheapest forms of power generation in Australia, even after taking into account the cost of storage and transmission. Mr. Morrison is under pressure to nominate targets for Australia. For business, these global pledges have real outcomes and real costs. Business will need to account for its use of fossil fuels in supply chains and production. They'll have to shift to renewable energy in coming decades, which will impact their investment decisions today. It has big implications for the oil and gas companies, among others, and shareholders are increasingly expecting more from management around the environment. In overseas news, Brexit negotiations continued over the weekend, with the deadline extended once again. While they may be talking, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson said the most likely outcome was no deal between the two sides. That's already had an impact with a rush on supermarket goods. People have already begun stockpiling, worried that many items won't be available after 31 December. Borders are likely to be slow and movement of people delayed. The United States will commence the rollout of the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine tonight. After receiving Federal Drug Administration approval over the weekend, the US has been the hardest hit by coronavirus, with 16.1 million cases and close to 300,000 deaths. And a $908 billion stimulus package is expected to go to Congress tonight, which should help markets. Locally, the Chinese Communist Party has infiltrated the Australian, British and United States consulates in Shanghai, with a government-run recruitment agency putting advisors into the embassies for more than 10 years, according to the Australian newspaper. A whistleblower in Shanghai has leaked the names of Communist Party members, and according to the newspaper, at least 10 consulates have party members employed as senior political and government affairs specialists, clerks, economic advisors, and executive assistants. It isn't clear whether any have spied for the Chinese government, though it's concerning that so many consulates have party members on the inside. A number of large corporates, including Boeing, ANZ and AstraZeneca, have also employed Communist Party members. It's a big week ahead for initial public offerings. There's 17 scheduled before the end of the year, including 14 this week, though some may well be pulled. The East 33 float, which was raising $32 million to consolidate the Sydney rock oyster sector, was delayed last week. The biggest one scheduled is Liberty Financial Group tomorrow, which hopes to raise $320 million. Westpac held its annual general meeting online on Friday. Chairman John McFarlane promised to restore to shareholders a steady stream of dividends next year. He also said the bank hadn't moved fast enough to address non-financial risks. For Westpac, the long process of recovering its reputation and financial performance finally begins. Union membership in Australia is on the slide. Bureau of Statistics figures show that membership fell to 1.49 million from 1.54 million 2 years ago. That means just 14.3% of the workforce is unionised. Back in 1994, that number was 40%. December is normally slowdown time for the auction market, but that's not the case in this incredible year. The volume of auction listings in Melbourne and Sydney rose over the weekend. The preliminary clearance rate was above 75%. And the Australian Financial Review points out that Andrew Forrest, founder and major shareholder in Fortescue Metals, made around $326 million each day last week as the share price of the iron ore miner surged. He's now worth more than $25.5 billion. That's the Fear and Greed business headlines for today. There's more on all of these stories in today's full Fear and Greed podcast, as well as an interview with Paul Bloxham, HSBC Chief Economist. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.